Hi there and welcome back. In this video we're looking at importing our own files. Importing just means allowing a file we're currently working on to use code defined in some other file. And we've done this with the JSON module in the last video. And that just meant getting the code in that module available for us to use. Now it's time to import code that we ourselves have written. That way we'll be able to split our programs into multiple files, and that's of course going to help because our program will have better organization, and when it comes to changing it and improving it, it's going to be a bit easier. Let's start by creating a new file inside our PyCharm project. I've created a new PyCharm project here, and I'm going to call it file operations. So that's file underscore operations. Remember, don't put any spaces in file names. That's a recipe for disaster in pretty much any computer, but especially when working with Python. Now, inside this file, we're going to write a couple of functions. One to save some content to a file, and the other one to read some content from a file. So save to file, the content we want to write is going to be the first parameter, and the file name is going to be the second parameter, and all it's going to do is use a context manager to open the file and then write the content. And then read file is going to be pretty similar. It's going to take the file name, and it's going to use a context manager to open the file and read the contents out fully as a single string and return them. Now, I think you can implement this knowing what you know already. And if you have to look at the code for the section, make sure to not look at the imports project, which is also available on GitHub, but look at the other files we've already written and then implement these functions using what you already know. Don't copy and paste code, just type it out. And once you've done that, come back to the video and we shall continue. I hope you managed. All we have to do is use a context manager to open the file name in write mode. And then what we're going to do is say file.write content. Oh, sorry, of course you need as file in there in order to have a variable. This is optional, by the way, but then you don't have anything pointing to whatever you've opened, and then you cannot write to it if you don't have a variable that points to open. Then, of course, for the reading, we're going to do open of file name, but this time in reading mode. And what we're going to do is return file.read. Notice how this is not going to give us the lines or anything like that, but this is going to be one long string that could contain things like this. See? Now, if we wanted lines after it, we can split on the \n. Dot split on \n is going to give us something like this: Rolf, Charlie, and so forth. So this is going to give us one long string. We can then split it into lines if we want. If your file is extremely long, you may have some problems with reading the entire file at once. But let's forget about this problem for now. So this is some relatively simple stuff, writing to a file and reading from it. We've already done this. But it's going to be useful as an example to look into importing. And indeed, this is essentially our first library. This library, we're going to import these two files, these two functions, and we're going to now very easily save things to a file and read them from a file without having to worry about opening them. Let's create a new file in our imports project called app.py. And now we're going to import the things from file operations. There are two ways that we can do that. The first one is we can import file operations. And then we can do file operations dot save to file, whatever we want to say, Rolf and data.txt, for example. We can do this, call the file operations module. Whenever you import something, by the way, the thing you're importing is now called a module. And it is executed in module mode, which is essentially the same as executing it in normal mode or script mode, but there are some minor differences that we're going to look at in a moment. So whenever you import something, that's a module. Whenever you run something, like if you run app.py, that's called a script. Okay, normally you'll have one script, that's app.py, and a bunch of modules, and that's everything else that you import. File operations is the module, and then we're accessing inside of it with a dot the save to file function. And to it, we give the two arguments that it needs: the content that we want to save and the file name. So let's right-click app.py and run it. Notice how nothing happens, but data.txt does get created, and Rolf is in it. This file has been closed as well because the save to file function in file operations has this context manager which closes the file at the end. So this is pretty cool. I mean, in a single line now, because we've got our library here, we are opening, saving, and closing the file without having to worry about doing that manually. The other option, I said there were two options for importing, is to do from file operations import save to file. And then the save to file is what becomes the globally available thing in this script, and you can just run that. Save to file directly. Of course, this is not so good if you're importing from many places and two things have the same name. It can happen. Then, of course, Python will be very confused, and you would only ever be able to use the one you import last. So if you have things with multiple things with the same name, use the former, import file operations. If you only have a couple of things that you want to import and use, feel free to import them like this. But at the end of the day, it's up to you, whatever you feel is more readable. Now, we can also have a comma after it and import write to file, or read file, sorry. Save to file is write to file, the same thing. Read file, and then we can print the read file of data.txt. Let's run that again. And now we get Rolf printed out down here at the bottom, because we've saved Rolf to data.txt, and then we've read it and printed it out. Notice how the file is opened and then closed, and opened and then closed in every function. Now, in a larger application, we would start separating our files into folders so that things are more organized and it's easier to find what we need. If all your Python files, potentially many hundreds of them, would be in the same imports project folder, you would have a lot of trouble finding the things you want, and it would get very messy very quickly. So instead, you normally would create a new directory. And I'm going to call it something like utils for utilities. File operations is going to be part of such utilities. Let's drag file operations into utils. And if you get asked to search for references, make sure to not check it, for that is going to completely moot the point that I'm about to show you. So don't search for references and press OK. Now we see a couple of things. File operations has moved into utils, and red lines have appeared everywhere. Of course, this is now an unresolved reference. It doesn't know what file operations is because it's no longer in the same directory as app.py. In fact, I'll even go as far as saying it's not in the same directory imports project, which is the top level directory of our project. So you can only do this from file operations import something if file operations is a module available on the top level of your project. Okay? Because now it's inside utils, we cannot do this. So what can we do? Well, we can run the file first of all to see that we get a module not found error. Just wanted to show you that this is what you get if you import something that doesn't exist. And we must do two things. We must, first of all, give Python the full path to import starting from the top level folder. So the full path is utils, and inside utils, we've got file operations. So utils, and inside utils, and we say dot, we've got file operations. There we have it. Now we've got utils, inside file operations, and we can import these two things. Now it works. Frequently though, it is a good idea to tell Python that the utils package, the utils directory here, is actually a Python package. And I'm not sure if this has changed recently in Python, but it used to be that you would have to tell Python this is a Python package before you could import things from it. Maybe it's no longer required, but nonetheless, for compliance with previous Python versions, it's always a good idea to tell Python that this folder, this directory, is a Python package, and it's a folder where Python files live and where you'll want to import. The way to do that is to right-click it and create a new Python file, and it must be called __init___.py. That's two underscores at the start, two underscores at the end, .py. You can close that file, for we do not need to write anything in it, but this is just what you should do for compliance with older Python versions. Okay. So now this directory here is called a package, so that Python knows that it can import things from there, at least in older versions. Okay, and this is how you give the full path to Python so that it knows where to look for your files. So that's it for this video. We've looked at importing our own files. We're going to look at relative imports in the very next video. I'll see you there.